Welcome to the Point of No Return podcast, a show at the intersection of technology and strategy. On this show, we interview industry leaders and experts to better understand how they think about strategy during this time of exponential progress.
Kalimera, welcome to the Point of No Return podcast. You might have heard of this little thing called the blockchain that's getting a little bit of attention recently. And it's my real pleasure today to have spoken with Laurent Féral-Pierseens, co-founder at Inception Block Ventures. Laurent is a fellow colleague from the consulting industry, but has recently started something called Inception Block Ventures, which we dive into. It's a Montreal-based venture capital firm dedicated to supporting the blockchain industry. He's also executive director at Blockchain Advisory of KPMG Canada. Laurent is an advisor to the board of the Blockchain Association of Canada, member of the AI Advisory Board of Finance Montreal, member of the IT Program Committee of the McGill School of Continuing Education. And by the way, he's also founded several successful technology startups. On the show, we spoke about how he's launched several successful startups, his path to KPMG, the genesis of Inception Block Ventures and their investment thesis, the growing importance of crypto assets, which industries are going to be impacted by blockchain, why he thinks blockchain is 10x more important than AI, and we actually dove into this. Laurent's a serial entrepreneur with a great track record. He eloquently explains the importance of blockchain and the strategic reasons to invest. I learned a bunch from our chat, and I hope that you do as well. Laurent, great to see you.
Great to see you as well. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for being on the show today, Laurent. It's a pleasure to catch up. It's been a little while. I guess one of the questions I've never really asked you is how did you get into the whole internet space in the early days, like in the late 90s?
Yeah, well, actually, I was at the university at McGill in computer science and math. So we saw the birth of Google and the like at that time. So we were directly involved with seeing the industry emerge. And right after university, I jumped into entrepreneurship 2 feet first.
So you went from university, essentially didn't get a job, just said, I'm going to open up a company.
I did quite a few interviews with really interesting companies, or especially in the US at the time. Did a few internships as well. But right after school and looking at those offers on the table, I really felt that I could contribute to the next generation, which was the beginning of the post.com bubble.
So, and what was the first company you founded?
So I founded a company called Distinct Horizon, which was initially a web development firm that turned really quickly into a life science data management company. So right away, the focus was on how do we manage digital data, digital assets, and the life science space was perfect with healthcare records, clinical records, for example, and research data in general. So it felt right timing with where the Montreal economy was at the time, which was the beginning of a life science phase.
Interesting. And then so you went from being a service business to more of a product?
Yeah, pretty quickly. You're young and you're starting a company. You want to help, and you start by helping web development, and within 6 months we turned around.
And what did you do with Distinct Horizon? Was it sold? Did you shut it down? Or?
Yeah, so it was merged with another company called Sequence Technologies.
Okay.
About 5 years after. That's when I moved into another company at the time called Metric News that was doing analytics, so marketing analytics. At the time, we were calling it email marketing. Small thing.
Yeah. Okay, and really cool. And then I think from your biggest success, at least from what it looks like, was Silent Tail. right? That seemed to be the biggest success story you had as an entrepreneur.
We've had, like all of the companies, we had quite a few pivots. So Silent-Tail was a really interesting way to merge and manage communications and contacts. Really big into 2008 with a Web 2.0. That's where we started to develop data science. Today we call it machine learning and AI. At the time it was really data management. We were able to develop the new and first algorithms around contact merging and communication pattern recognitions.
And when you're at Silent-Tail, this is now your fourth startup that you've launched?
Absolutely.
What do you think, like having been in, launched yourself multiple quote unquote successful startups, what do you think, was the skill set you needed in order to do it?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't think there's any particular skill set. I think understanding the market, knowing and recognizing the push and pull of the economy at large was a big factor. I wouldn't call all of those success. As we pivoted many times. This is the beginning of putting a MVP on the market, getting first clients, having a few successes, and then pivoting again because the market changed.
Interesting, yeah. So it's not, the skill set from what you're saying is just being able to adapt and listen to the market, essentially.
Exactly. High tolerance for both risk and ability to adapt both product-wise, technology-wise, and based on the market.
I can imagine that the pivots also were painful, right? Like going through a pivot is not a fun thing because it means something's not working, so you need to change.
You're always on the edge, so I wouldn't say painful. I think the whole entrepreneurship experience is an environment in which you are on the edge all the time. So pain is part of a deal.
Yeah. So what's the expression, right? In order to grow, basically, you have to go through pain, right?
Exactly.
You have to push yourself to limits.
And you have to recognize where you're failing. So inflicted pain might be quite important.
Were there any moments where you felt like you wanted to give up, or it was too tough and you're like, screw this? Or
almost every day. No, I think the resilience is part of the entrepreneur, and amazing teams, the ability to push forward and understand that this is a step towards a greater goal. Keeping that goal in mind, I would say, is the hardest part.
So having like the more global vision basically in mind, is that an accurate way of saying it? Or?
I would say global vision is something that needs to be there, and you need to be attuned to it. It's the goal of the mission of the company, why you exist, why are we doing this, and that's what we're applying today for the teams we're looking at.
That's great. And I want to get to Inception Block, but I want to talk about that shift, right? So you went from having Silent-Tail, then you went to KPMG, where you were there for a few years.
Absolutely. So while we were at Silent-Tail and facing another pivot, I had a great conversation with one of the partners at KPMG with whom we wanted to work with, and he wanted to work with us, and we decided to close Silent-Tail, the product, at the mid 2016, and that partner turned around and asked me, "It's like, so what's the next one?" And casually, not having an answer for him, I said, "Well, I want to step back. I've been doing this for 15 years. There's a lot of market trends that I'm not familiar with anymore after doing this for heads down for 15 years. So he suggested we can bring and merge this both expertise and interest into a group like KPMG to contribute I would say, to a consulting firm like this. So I joined as, you can say, as an entrepreneur in residence, if you want.
And what attracted you the most to KPMG? Having been an entrepreneur now, you're going now to a big global organization. So curious as to that shift.
Actually, it was some of that pain that I realized over as an entrepreneur to not necessarily understand well the institutions, the larger firms and the larger stakes. And having been, again, heads down for so long, those larger stakes were foreign to me. And that attracted me to a firm like KPMG that was involved at a different level. And I think that's what really gave birth to the next step. The ability to understand both the developer world, the startup world, the financing world, the capital world, and the larger institution, the banking environment, the supply chain environment, the manufacturing world. So these are all the new stakes that we were looking at.
Interesting. Yeah. So you like, it sounds like you had a lot of a good, let's say, it's something I call the T in terms of expertise. You had a lot of expertise in web and tech, and now by moving more to management consulting, you've developed like kind of this T-shaped expertise where you have a really good deep expertise in one field, but you also have a broader set of expertise across, you said, like multiple sectors, multiple industries.
Exactly. And that really bridged the gap with the current market forces, if you want.
And how quickly did you get interested in this whole blockchain thing?
Extremely quickly. I basically joining KPMG in late 2016. My mandate was emerging tech. So I came with Scientel was basically machine learning and artificial intelligence. So emerging tech was the proper place where I could play. And when we started working on a study for the impact of artificial intelligence on the financial sector that we did with KPMG on behalf of Finance Montreal, we quickly realized through an analysis that the impact of AI was going to be massive, but the impact of blockchain was tenfold. And that's when I started falling down the rabbit hole, understanding, okay, why? How come? What is going to change? And that's where I spent a better part of that year exploring and understanding the impact and being in contact with the organizations to understand their view, their fear, their understanding of what was going to happen. At the same time, understanding or seeing how the startup ecosystem and the developer network were developing.
Interesting. Yeah, I would just push back on maybe one thing, or just like to better understand and unpack one point you said. You said that blockchain is going to have a 10x bigger impact than AI, right? And obviously, I think both types of technologies, machine learning specifically on blockchain, are still nascent and growing rapidly. But I can at least personally, I can see a lot more applications today of AI and like the impact it could have. If you think of things like autonomy in driving or in healthcare, it seems it could be much more transformative than just blockchain. But again, my knowledge of blockchain is still very primitive. So I'd love to understand why you think it's such a huge change. Obviously, it's moving beyond just finance and banking. It's impacting a lot of different fields. That much I know. But I'd love to understand a bit deeper why you think it's so much more important.
Well, AI, and I'm not undermining what AI can bring to the organizations and the economy. I think it's massive. And as you said, the possibilities are on an enabling factor. So AI is enabling processes, enabling organizations, new products. Blockchain, on the other hand, is creating a new paradigm. It is transforming the way organization will, I would say, transact. And I'm not talking Bitcoin. I mean the ability to intrinsically create a new asset class that is natively digital. And this is very nascent, as you said. The impact is, we're just starting to grasp what it can do. But the transformation that it will have on our economy is fundamental. It's transforming the finance sector, obviously, but it's also transforming every other industry that is relying on an intermediary. And at a, I would say, more ideological scale, the very concept of a corporation is put at play with what decentralization can do.
Yeah, we've heard things like the DAO, for instance, and decentralized autonomous organizations. And so, again, like you said, it's still early days. What are the specific ideas you think today are going to have the most impact, let's say, within the next 5 years, right? Because we could all see, the ideas of floating around of, Facebook's going to be disrupted because there'll be, everyone's going to have their own personal ID and they'll own their social data, et cetera, et cetera. But all these consumer-facing applications seem very far away. Which ones do you think have the most legs, let's say more short-term, like 0 to 5 years?
Oh, I think on a 5-year scale, most of these will emerge or have started to emerge. Coming back to examples. For example, I believe that the healthcare environment is prime to be disrupted in the sense that data is at the core of most of what we do. And the reason healthcare is interesting is that we understand that healthcare data is ours individually. Why is it residing in a network that is controlled by someone else? Why is it so hard to have a copy of X-rays, for example? Why is it so inefficient to have 2 doctors transferring data to each other? So it's easy to see how a network, so a blockchain network where the data is intrinsically digital, is put back in the hands of a user, and the user gives access to the institution. We're not saying that the healthcare network is going to be decentralized completely. We're going to still see enterprise software for hospitals and healthcare networks, but they are going to connect to a network where the data resides with the user.
Mm-hmm. So from that perspective, having spoken a little bit about this with you, I'm guessing your philosophy about this is that we're still very much in the early days, right? The early innings of this transformation.
Yes, one of the important aspects, and you see it and you hear it commented often. We're in the 95, 96 of 2000s, of the beginning of the internet. We haven't invented the browser yet. There's going to be applications and tools that are going to enable access, that are going to enable a global deployment, if we want.
So as such, I guess you've decided to throw your kind of chips into the whole blockchain thing by launching something called Inception Block Ventures. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what that is, what you guys are planning to do.
Yeah. So basically, we seeing how the startup and the developer community was starting to create applications that are disrupting industries globally. And seeing the institutions being siloed in their environment, we felt that there was a need for sort of a venture capital investment. There was a need for capital that could back entrepreneurs on a 10-year scale, thinking, well, when we invest, we want to support those teams and those successive pivots over the emergence of this new innovation.
And what do you find that Inception Block Ventures thesis is going to be? Is it going to be investing purely in blockchain startups? Is it going to be a bit tangential to that as well?
So we're identifying three types of projects or teams. The first one that is basically well covered by other investment groups or capital is the infrastructure side. The second one that we're seeing is what we call the adoption tool sets. So those are the tools that make the adoption more global. You can imagine reporting tools, forensic tools, KYC tools that are helping the industry basically take a grasp. The bet is finding the equivalent of a browser, if you want. And the third element, the third bucket, the one that is the most disruptive, is identifying the teams and the projects that are going to change an industry completely. So groundbreaking transformation of healthcare, financial services, and supply chain, for example, are the first ones that come to mind.
Interesting, yeah. So you guys are about to invest in companies that don't exist yet, I imagine, right? Like a lot of these are being created as we speak. Yeah. Do you look to any other investors, like I think specifically of like Union Square or Lux Capital in New York, that those guys are really bullish on blockchain?
Absolutely. There's great groups that are investing across the world on some of those technologies at the protocol level, so underlying, and at the application level. We are seeing that application level take shape and crystallize as we speak. And we are obviously looking at and with them for creating that ecosystem. Our realm is really supporting the Canadian environment and the Canadian ecosystem. There's one particularity of the blockchain technology is that it might be a paradigm shift, but it's technology that's quite easy to understand for a student, for a new group that has not been in our world for 20 years. So we're seeing quite a few interesting projects emerging from the dorm rooms, very much like what happened in the Web 1.0.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because they don't come with preconceived notions of how things are supposed to be, right?
And their mind is already global citizen, global corporations, and decentralization as their fundamentals.
Yeah. So as one of the co-founders of Inception Block, what's your current priorities? What are you guys looking to do over the next year, let's say?
So we're doing, first element is obviously working with the community and with the teams to create that ecosystem and make certain that Canada can leverage its assets to be a global player.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so because it's so early days, I guess there is a bit of community involvement where you have to get out and understand where are the different pockets of people that are working on this, right? Absolutely. I imagine that we're starting to see more and more like meetups about blockchain, etc. What do you think is the most widely misunderstood aspect of this technology?
I think the concept of crypto asset is very foreign. Obviously, because it's new, but it's a new asset class, and it's an environment that for you and I that has lived in a virtual world forever, that is very difficult to grasp. The notion of crypto assets itself is, I think, what's the most difficult element.
Because that leads to people understanding, for instance, like the tokenization of elements, right? So if Amazon wants to create, let's say, their own loyalty program tomorrow and then remove itself from, the being a public company, for instance, but just share its tokens, that I think is tough for people to wrap their heads around because it's a whole new type of asset that doesn't exist yet, that's not proven.
Yeah, I often try to define a crypto asset as a virtual tangible asset, which are two very different concepts. But the ability to realize that you can create a new asset, a digital asset, and control its life cycle has infinite possibilities.
If you're an early stage startup today, would you recommend the automatic route of doing an ICO, for instance? I know there's a little bit of, how should I say, froth at the ICO level. I think it's kind of calmed down this year, but particularly tail end of last year was a little bit crazy. So just love to understand your thoughts about initial coin offerings.
So I believe it's an element of fundraising that needs to happen at some point. I also see ICOs as a go-to-market strategy for some of those projects. I don't think it is viable for any and every company out there. The organization or the product needs to have a fundamentally decentralized I would say business model or product for that to make a lot of sense.
Interesting, yeah. So you won't be raising your round in ICO form, just a bad joke. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, it could lead to a few different directions, but in terms of the stuff that's happening in the industry that you think is not having enough attention, what do you think is happening right now that you see is not being spoken about enough?
We're in the middle of it, so we feel a lot has been talked about. I think the importance of of data, and so that sounds awkward in the last few weeks, but the importance of data, the importance of what does it mean to transfer the ownership of data from corporation to user-controlled data. That's the key.
Yeah. Like the whole how this house is built, right? Like the house being every single institution, how it's built in terms of just the notion of data ownership is potentially going to change, right? And that's like going back to your 10x about how it's different. Well, that's one of the elements that would make it a very, very different impact.
Yeah, that's exactly where it leads. Is that we understand data is ours. We just don't know where it is. And the moment that data becomes, we take control of that data again, the organizations, the institutions change. They will still service those business models, but they will service them through request for data, through temporary access, through proxy, but they will service us instead of controlling the whole stack.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, like one idea I've had recently is the whole notion, I think, of just nations is going to change, right? Like how countries are formed. Anyways, I don't want to go down too deep a philosophical rat hole, but if you look at what government provides us, right, in terms of like security, healthcare, protection, things like that, well, a lot of those things are going to go away or be down to zero, essentially, right? Things like healthcare.
I kind of disagree here. I do believe there's going to be a transformation and the institution will adapt to the new reality. One of the concepts that is misunderstood is global currency, for example. I believe there's going to be a tokenized Canadian dollar at some point. What does that mean? That means that we will still have a currency. We will still be able to use financial institutions to provide products around those assets. But instead of controlling the line, controlling the currency, we will give it in custodian as a custodian. So it redefines the products. I take a comparison often with the telecom industry. The telecom industry used to control the dial tone. Well, when they deployed the internet infrastructure, they didn't expect the dial tone to go away and transition to the internet. That's basically what's going to happen. The telecom industry still exists. They're going through much pivots and a lot of pain as well, but they are transforming. And that's what we're going to see over the next few years.
That's a very interesting take. What do you think is the most exciting thing that, keeps you up and you read about and you find that's really exciting right now?
Oh, I think this notion of crypto economy, and that it's a beast by itself, is not misunderstood. We are just starting to study it, to understand what it can become. There's elements on monetary distribution that every team talk about, and economists talking to technologists, talking to product people. This is absolutely an amazing group that has never collided before.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, because it's an intersection of so many different fields, right? No, it's really cool, Laurent. I guess my last question would be is just where can people find out more about what you're doing, what's going on? It seems like it's such an early field that you must be just reading half your day right now just to keep on top of it. So I guess the two questions to kind of end. One would be is where, your favorite resources to keep on top of this field besides crypto Twitter, which could be the best and the worst place. And then where people can find out more about you.
Yes, so there's quite a few interesting sources and even a few books to learn about crypto and blockchain in general. It's still being put together. The best place to reach me and get access, depending on the angle that you have, is through my LinkedIn profile. So linkedin.com/in/Pierseens.
Cool. Super cool. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Point of No Return podcast. Never miss an episode by clicking on the subscribe button on iTunes or Google Play.